Welcome to It Gets Weird, our comedy show where we explore the unusual, the unbelievable, and the unexplained to try and make your world a little weirder. I'm Kyle.
And I'm Niall. And we're having a bit of an unusual recording time here because we're recording earlier than normal because I'm currently drinking coffee, which is not my normal beverage of choice because normally we're recording in the evenings. But today we're having a coffee cast.
Well, if I finally get my fucking shit together, which is on, that's on my list. I have this board over here that's like kind of a list of things that I need to do.
Yeah.
Right at the top of that thing says, get your fucking shit together. Now, and, under that, it's like go grocery shopping,
right?
Sweep the lawn or whatever.
Yeah, sweep the lawn. That's what you do. Now, is this list in terms of like, are these items like ranked in terms of how high they, like your need to do them are, or is it just in chronological order?
It's in order of importance.
Okay.
And let me, but the way my mind works is it functions more like a stack call in a computer where like it's first in, last out.
Okay.
Sure. So, I tend to not get to the important things like I should. Because of that.
Brush your teeth keeps going in the morning every day, and you never get down to what's below.
Never quite get there. No, I mean, if I were to get my shit together, I would love to do these recordings earlier on like a Sunday, so I gotta work on that for sure, because I would like to make that more of a thing, because frankly, look, we're so chipper right now, can you believe that? And then it's like versus like 6 p.m. recordings, we're both just like, I haven't had dinner yet.
Squeezing it in.
Yeah. So no, that's I think we do a good job with those two.
No,
but
it's totally fine.
I do like these earlier recordings a lot. So just a little peek behind the curtain, which everybody loves. Everybody's like, oh my God, what's their method?
Look, eventually I'll find out how to have like opening show banter that isn't just directly referencing the thought I had before we pressed record. But today's not that day.
That's okay. Let's take a sip of that coffee, because I'm Niall, I'm your guide today. As you know, and the listener really should know by, just looking at episode titles and all kinds of stuff. There's a lot of clues there, right?
You're my Uri Geller guide.
That's right, Mr. Podcaster left you all the clues. This is part 3 of my Uri Geller series.
Is that one of the only movies in recent memory that the meme will outlive any memory of the actual movie it's from?
Probably. I haven't seen the movie. I know next to nothing about the movie except that. Actually, I think it's the only thing I know about that movie.
The movie got like hardcore sabotaged by they straight up released it without finishing it. There's just like 20 minutes that never got shot.
I didn't know that.
So yeah, it's a whole thing. But
what's the movie called again?
The Snowman.
It's called The Snowman. Yeah. Right up there with other movies with really enticing titles for horror and suspense. Like
the one that's been getting me lately isn't
Bye
horror.
Bye Man.
The Bye Bye Man, yes. The one that is getting me lately isn't actually horror. It's an action film, and it's starring Jason Statham, and it's called The Beekeeper. And
Okay.
it is.
I think I've heard of that.
It's in the vein of action films right now. That is, we're going to substitute a gimmick job for hitman or
okay, sure.
Or whatever, or like secret agent. So like I feel like people are throwing darts at a board of like weird job titles that they can like euphemistically make into like killing people.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It looks ridiculous.
You know what just occurred to me too is this is going to be the last episode of It Gets Weird in 2023. This is a clean cut. This is a clean cut. We're ending with this Uri Geller 3-parter.
Right.
And when we go into 2024, it's going to be something new.
Is this episode actually going up on the 31st?
Let me
I think it would be.
Look at the calendar here. Yes, indeed it is.
Cool.
Wow. Ringing in the new year with some It Gets Weird. Here's shouts out to 2024. Let's get it. Let's get that bread, that paper. This is part 3. of Uri Geller.
$2 to $5 at a time on patreon.com.
Yeah.
So how's Uri doing this week, Kyle?
Yeah, well, if you haven't listened to parts 1 and 2, get the fuck out of here. Right?
I mean, don't like leave entirely. Maybe just go back 2 episodes.
Go back 2 episodes unless you want Uri Geller spoilers. It would be really weird to come in on part 3 without hearing those first 2 parts.
You can do a kind of one of those like modern in media res openings where you listen to like the first half hour of part 3 and then go back to part 1 and then finish through till the end.
I'm sure that's just as engaging to do with a 3-part podcast series as it is with like a movie where it is specifically designed to do that.
Oh, but, where there's an intentional narrative structure, whereas here it's just like
here it would just be like going backwards, right? Like,
it would not be good.
Which I can't even like. I guess I can. The thing is though, like I can kind of imagine trying to end the story of Uri Geller with that second episode, just because that's kind of his like rise to fame. That's like the peak of Uri Geller. And we're still going to talk about the peak here, but like it's also a pretty interesting decline. So, this is our last episode on Uri Geller for Psychic Winter. So let's do it. So we left off with Geller joining the research project at Stanford Research Institute, which, if you'll recall from my Ingo Swan episodes, Geller was like, he was the star subject at SRI. Puthoff and Targ were apparently so impressed with Geller's psychokinetic performance that they wrote up a paper about it with their findings, and it got published in Nature in 1974. So what exactly did SRI do to conduct experiments on Geller's amazing powers? I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this stuff, just kind of briefly talk about the stuff that's in this paper specifically. But just because it's honestly not super interesting. I think I've said before that like I might just have to do a parapsychology experiments episode where I talk about all the different kinds of things that people would do and how those experiments would be like, how those results, quote unquote, would be sort of read by the people conducting them. And it might be interesting to do an episode like that. We kind of have done that.
Because every time we talk about parapsychology and stuff like that, I am always just like, we talk a lot about the people and like about specific incidents and stuff, but it would be interesting to know like what were like the common practices of parapsychology and their full like what did they do and what did they think it meant. So yeah, I'd be into that.
We've touched on it a little bit. Like I did like 2-3 years ago, I did a series on parapsychology where it was just kind of like a broad overview of the history. And I believe it was like J.B. Rhine and like his cards that they used to like for people to like, predict what was on the cards and blah, blah, blah. There's a whole bunch of methodology, and I've touched on some of the more famous or well-known things that they've done, but I didn't get too deep into the practices. So, but here I have some information on what they did with Geller. And so let's unpack that a little bit. So, first of all, they performed hidden drawing experiments where a drawing is placed in an envelope and sealed off, and then Geller is instructed to draw what he believes is inside the envelope. And it's stressed by the SRI scientists or experimenters that at no time was Geller given any sort of advanced knowledge about what was drawn inside the envelope.
Now, do you know what kind was it? Just like a circle, or was it like a landscape of France?
No,
like,
you can actually see in the published article the images that were drawn.
Okay.
Because like they were usually drawn by the experimenters, and then Geller would like have a response drawing where he's trying to determine what they're trying to get him to draw. Okay. So during an experiment like this, Geller would explain how he has this sort of mental, quote unquote, television screen onto which he attempts to project the image inside the target envelope. And so then he would draw a response image. In another experiment, Geller was directed to choose among 10 steel cans and discover which one held a ball bearing inside of it. And then Geller, in some versions of the experiment, would point out a can by number because they were numbered on the top, and the experimenter would remove it. And so he would just repeat this process until he decided which one he believes had the ball inside. So cans getting removed until he gets to the one that has the ball. You like that? You like that one?
He's just naming ones and then noticing there's no ball bearing and being like, good, just take that one away.
Well,
like, that's not how those should work.
The idea was that he's like, I mean, yeah, I agree. It is like kind of a silly idea. I mean, and they would do different permutations of these tests, right? But this is the one that gets shown in like one of the videos that you can find of the SRI experiments. Mm-hmm. And, you know, like they would do stuff like different target objects would be swapped into these cans. So like in another version, there was just water in the can. And then in another version, there's a sugar cube. I honestly don't even know why they would bother swapping in different objects. I guess it's just to determine like if there's some, I don't really know. It's maybe to determine like what target objects he can see, quote unquote, with his mind versus what ones he can't.
The like water one makes some sense to me of like, can he see through water? Like how does vision, but I guess maybe because like they were thinking with the sugar cube, that's not going to be metallic in any way. So if it's like X-ray based or something, I can kind of figure out what they were thinking there, but it is still just like all of these things seem a little suspect to me.
Believe me, yes. All of this shit, everything about Uri Geller should feel suspect, by the way, as you will discover. And like another, like in some cases, he wouldn't be like pulling out the cans. He would be writing down on a paper to like what number he decided on. So like, again, different permutations. There's another experiment where they have 6-sided dice and they would just roll a die in a box and Geller would have to make a guess. So he's just guessing what number is on the 6-sided die.
Yeah.
And like, by the accounts published in Nature, which namely this is Puthoff and Targ, plus Geller's own account of things, he was like really good at these experiments, and like they would like say like, oh, this has a guess of like 3 million to 1 that he was able to do this. And I'm gonna just go ahead and say that like scientists who have looked at this article, including the people who ended up publishing it, by the way, think that these tests are not very good. But again, Puthoff and Targ were both like amazed by it. They would basically endorse him as a psychic.
Do you think he ever did that thing that you see in like movies where someone's panicking and they try to like write 2 letters as one letter so the B looks like a D, or like do you think he ever tried to make like a 4 that also looked kind of like a 2, you know, up his chances?
I've watched a lot of footage of this man now. And maybe his tricks are like more mundane than that, as we'll discover. Okay. So I don't know, but I like where your head's at. So in the article, the examiners are basically saying like, okay, he scored quote unquote well on 6 of the clairvoyance and telepathy tests, and then fair on 2 of them. And I think there were like 11, which to them is like this passing grade, right? Like he's passed our tests. Okay. Again, very shaky. Now, here's a weird thing. In the Geller documentary, you can see footage of SRI quote-unquote testing, in which Geller appears to match up these like envelope images in the test like perfectly. But what you see in the documentary is like they're these small, simple drawings that he's drawn, but they're like mirrored and they're like perfect almost. If you want to, these images in the documentary, these are not the ones that are shown in the published article in Nature. And when you look at those images, You can see that a lot of them don't really seem to match, but a lot of them still get this pass from the experimenters. And some of them are like, there are some where it's like, there's one where it's like a bundle of grapes. Okay. And Geller draws what is effectively the same image in the actual published article. As for the ones in the video that you can find, I don't know what those are, but they claim that those are, they claim that those are also from the test, but these are not in the article. So I don't know what that's about. Now, there's also a lot of questions about the conditions that they were conducting these tests in, which is a thing that will come up with Geller over and over. So again, from the Skeptic's Handbook of Parapsychology, which I really want to get my hands on this book. It seems like a lot of fun, at least for me. But here's what it says. Skeptics have criticized the test for lacking stringent controls. They have pointed out that the pictures drawn by Geller did not match what they were supposed to correspond to, but appeared rather to be responses to verbal cues. What constituted a quote-unquote hit is open to dispute. The conditions under which the experiments were conducted were extremely loose, even chaotic at times. The sealed room in which Uri was placed had an aperture from which he could have peeked out, and his Confederate Shippy, who, if you remember from episode 2, is his like lifelong part. Which weird thing that I discovered when I was doing research is that I guess Shippy Strang like lives with Uri Geller and his wife.
Oh,
I don't know what that's about, but they're lifelong like duo now.
Okay.
So, his Confederate Shippy was in and about the laboratory and could have conveyed signals to him. The same was true in another test of clairvoyance where Geller passed twice, but surprisingly guessed 8 out of 10 times the top face of a die that was placed in a closed metal box. The probability of this happening by chance alone was, we are told, 1 in a million. Critics maintain that the protocol of this experiment was, again, poorly designed, that Geller could have peeked into the box, and that dozens of other tests from which there were no positive results were not reported. Geller failed a third test in which he was supposed to draw his impression of target pictures that had been placed inside of sealed envelopes. Targan Puthoff also reported in Nature that, although metal bending by Geller had been observed in their laboratory, they had not been able to combine such observations with adequately controlled experiments to obtain data sufficient to support the paranormal hypothesis. Now, another funny thing about this is that if you go to Uri Geller's website, he has a whole section that's like, what do the skeptics say? And he takes points like what I just described to you and basically is just like, no, that's not true. Like
and doesn't like have evidence. He just says no.
Essentially, like he goes into like minor details, but he basically is just like, you're wrong, actually. Yeah. And that's just on his website.
That makes sense.
While skeptical and scientific sources were, questioning the validity of basically everything surrounding the SRI experiments with Geller was receiving a huge boon for his career. Like, this stuff really helped push him forward. According to the Skeptic's Handbook, scientists began referring to Geller's run through the scientific community as the quote-unquote Geller effect, which I think is maybe a co-opted term, because Geller himself talks about the Geller effect, which for him is like, so for scientists, it's like this effect where like people who have like a modicum of like belief in the strange or the paranormal or whatever, like he would be able to convince them. And Geller would basically be taking advantage of scientists who are willing to test his powers. And Geller's whole thing is that whenever he shows up to a thing, to an event, to a media, whatever, strange psychic phenomena would occur. But again, anybody with even the slightest disposition to believing in the supernatural could be made a true believer by Geller. And it's around this time that he would perform mind-bending, or should I say spoon-bending, psychic feats in the U.S. media. Geller would appear on talk shows. This is also happening around Europe, too, before he makes it to the U.S. He would appear on talk shows and things where he could miraculously rub a piece of silverware, which would seem to turn to a soft plastic in his grip. And then these utensils would bend, and sometimes, in other cases, they would just snap and break. And lots of people are amazed by this performance. Oftentimes there would be these like call-in portions to the programs where he would like prompt people. He'd be like, people at home, I'm going to make your clock start working again. He would say stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
And they would get like hundreds of calls with people being like, "Oh my god, it worked," or this one thing happened when you said.
He would
like,
just blanket it out over and oh my god.
What's really funny is the Amazing Randy has a portion where he did the same thing on a radio show with a plant. He basically put a plant who was like, "I'm psychic. I can do this. I can make these things happen with your stuff at home or whatever." And then they would get tons of calls of people confirming it. And then Randy would come out and be like, that guy was not a psychic. He was a plant by me. Not real.
Yeah.
So here's how that works. It's fucking cold reading all over again. Yep. So yeah. However, there was one TV show host who was not so impressed with Uri Geller, or at the very least was skeptical. And I'm curious if you've heard of this, Niall. Shortly after Geller's rise to fame in the U.S. in the early 70s, he got a call from Johnny Carson at The Tonight Show.
I believe I have heard about this.
Which I think Johnny Carson was actually also at one point a practicing magician. So, like, that's why he's skeptical. Now, Carson had also called up the man who would become Geller's nemesis, the Amazing Randy. And Randy was no stranger to the Johnny Carson show. He had been on it a number of times previously. So when he got the call and was asked to help prepare some psychic tests for Geller, he obliged. One of the setups that Randy instructed, this is just an example, he instructed the crew at The Tonight Show to do the, like, SRI water in a can trick where they have a bunch of cans and he has to guess which one has water. Mm-hmm. But Randy describes how he told the crew to put rubber cement on the bottom of the cans, not to glue them to the tray that they were brought out on, but rather to let the cement dry, which would prevent the cans from slipping around on the surface of the tray. And so this was to prevent Geller from doing what Randy predicted he would do, which is rotate the tray or the table or whatever around a few times and take note of how the cans moved on the tray.
Yeah.
This was so, like, he could still pick them up because the rubber's dried on the bottom, but it's not like glued to the thing, so he can still pick them up, and that's the
just
idea.
Acting as like skid stuff,
yes.
So that the cans all will move the same instead of one's moving differently for the water. That makes sense.
Randy's intervention at The Tonight Show was a humiliating success against Geller, even in the early 70s at the start of his career. He could not perform like he usually. He just failed. Like, while they had taken some measures to prevent trickery at Randy's instruction, I think one of the big notes here is that neither Geller nor his people that he worked with were allowed at any point to provide or interact with the test objects, and that's a big thing. Where you'll see him go on a talk show in, like, Germany, mm-hmm. and I think there's one where he's, like, provided, they're like, "Oh, here, we have a set of utensils for you, Geller." And he's like, "Oh, actually, I'd like to use this ladle," which he picks up, and it's from a pile of objects that his people provided.
Yeah. Because, like, isn't the whole thing with the spoon bending that there's, like, they put a point in it they make out of a soft metal that, like, can be warmed up to the touch and then flexible?
Well, the thing
is that a thing?
It's not exactly that. It's that they're basically pre-bent. Like, there's a couple different things that they do, right? Like, but a lot of the times what we're dealing with here, and I actually watched a video of Randy literally do the exact same thing with a spoon, where it's like you prep it, you bend it, you find a certain kind of spoon or whatever that's like good for this, and you kind of bend it until it's like it's reached a point where you can, like, futz with it like a magician might, and then eventually it, like, bends or snaps.
Yeah. Okay.
And if you watch Uri Geller do this stuff, he'll, like, have, like, the ladle, for instance, on the German talk show, and he'll, like, be kind of rubbing it between his fingers. Yeah. At the point where he has bent it. Like, I don't think you can ever find like him like bending it and at any other point where he can't get like leverage, you know? If that makes sense. So like he'll just like rub it and he'll like insist, you know, it's not warm. I'm just like dematerializing the metal or whatever, like whatever he claims he's doing.
Yeah, he's saying some bullshit.
Yeah. And then, yeah, it'll like, after he does this for like 10 minutes, it'll just like snap or whatever. So that's how he does it.
All right.
So one of the big criticisms of Geller that, again, he just like basically rejects is that these so-called scientific experiments on his psychic abilities tended to cede lots of control to Geller, as I've just described. Even just a little bit of this control could allow him to perform magician's trickery during experiments and talk show appearances. I mean, that is, of course, if you're a skeptic. Anyways, what happens on the Carson show is eventually, I don't remember who said this, but they described cutting to what is like essentially 20 minutes of commercial and cutaway.
Yeah.
And then coming back with Johnny Carson just being like, I guess Geller's not feeling very strong tonight. And Geller being very like, you know, it's I forget exactly what Geller says, but Geller's like making excuses. Typically his thing would be, over the years, would be like whenever he fails, he would say that the negative vibes and the non-believers were interfering with his psychic abilities, which is, again, that's a classic trope of this kind of person.
Yeah.
So
because it comes in really handy when your shit don't work.
Yeah. If it's all human energy that you're drawing on, then like you can make the excuse that the human energy also can influence, you know, your ability to do
Johnny,
this stuff.
the vibes tonight are random.
Yeah. Yeah. Fucking Johnny Carson basically reverse vibe checked Geller.
Yeah.
And Geller thought he was going to be ruined.
I mean, yeah, Johnny Carson is like one of the biggest platforms at that time, probably. So that's.
Here's the sad fact, though. Despite getting fucking humiliated by Carson and Randy, it would not stop him at all. He would end up having a successful career. So on his website, Geller boasts like a big list of scientific institutions and notable figures in the scientific community who seem to have backed his legitimacy. It's like he literally is just like name dropping. He's like, oh, this guy worked with Einstein and he endorses me or whatever. He even has a very weird. This is, again, a thing that I just don't have time to get into. He has a weird thing where he claims to have like made an acquaintance and maintain some sort of like relationship with Wernher von Braun when he worked with NASA and stuff, you know, and he, you know, he talks about, oh yeah, this guy's an ex-Nazi, but like, you know, hey, he gave up that life when he came to work for NASA. And it's weird. And he like says that like Wernher von Braun says that Geller had managed to bend his wedding ring with his mind and stuff, and it's all kinds of stuff like that. If you want to see his list of this shit, with that I don't have time to get into, go to his website. Easy to find. Now, in the documentary, it would seem that credulous scientists and talk show hosts weren't the only people interested in Geller's abilities. This is where I have to go 100% by the claims that these people make. So Puthoff claims that towards the end of Geller's run with SRI, the experimenters were approached by Israeli intelligence. Puthoff claims that Israel had only gotten a chance to do quote-unquote operational things with Geller.
Okay.
Not sure what those were exactly. They make some hints at what those were, but we don't know. And they were hoping that the CIA would be willing to share the scientific side of like the research that they got with Geller. And it's really, honestly, in this documentary, it's kind of funny how melodramatic Puthoff and Geller are when they bring up intelligence agencies. Like, Puthoff will be like, we got a contact, and he'll, like, have this dramatic pause from Israeli intelligence. And it's very funny. And Geller fucking stops to chew the scenery when he brings up this stuff. Like, because like it seems so smug.
It seems like more than anything, this guy is good at spinning his bullshit.
That's his thing. He's charismatic.
Guy.
Yeah.
He there's no bad situation for him to get in because he just will continue to keep doing his thing.
Yes.
So he can get humiliated on live TV, but he'll spin it into, I was on Johnny Carson and 1 million people watched. Who gives a fuck? Like
he can spin a yarn. He's charismatic. He knows how to do some basic magic tricks. And if you try to very publicly debunk him, he'll sue you. So, So, when asked about Israeli intelligence's interest in the SRI work, Geller says this, quote, "I'm aware that my work was constantly monitored by Israeli sources. I'm also aware of a rumor that while I was at SRI, the CIA suspected that I was acting as a double agent." Puthoff also seemingly confirms, quote unquote, confirms this rumor, claiming to have been asked about potential spying by his personal CIA contact. They also make a note here that, like, I guess George H.W. Bush was then the director of the CIA and was likely briefed on Geller. So there's another connection. Another thing that you find with Geller is that he has 1 million connections with important and famous and powerful people. He just knows everybody.
Yeah.
So Geller then does this extremely weird thing with the man behind the camera in the documentary at this point, where the guy talking to him is like, look, let's fantasize about a scenario where you are a CIA double agent, like, against them. Like,
Jesus.
That's what he says. And then he says something of that nature. And Geller responds by saying something like, this is paraphrasing, but he goes, let's pretend there's this guy and he's called Daredevil. And Daredevil was born in Tel Aviv. And he was in the paratroopers with the Israeli military, and he was excited to work for the Mossad. If Daredevil was asked to report on what he saw and learned in the U.S. to protect the state of Israel, don't you think Daredevil would do that? Of course he would, but I'm not saying that I did it.
That's like the OJ book. I'm not saying I did it, but if I did, here's how it would happen.
It's so stupid. It's like remarkably stupid, and especially so because it just so happens that, like, Geller has a famous connection to Daredevil of Marvel Comics. So he's literally just saying that's what I did. Like, I know, it's so ridiculous. So I actually have here, Niall, a little thing for you that I set aside because I was like, I want to tell Niall about this because I think Niall would enjoy this. Marv Wolfman, in an editorial column, explains how Geller ended up in Daredevil issue 133, helping take down the villain Mindwave and his fearsome think tank.
I have seen panels of this appearance in Daredevil. I don't know the full story though. Marv Wolfman.
Yes.
Oh God, take me away.
So here's what Marv Wolfman says. Stan said he'd like to use Uri Geller in one of our comics and that I should find a place for him. At that time, I had heard of Geller. He was some sort of a metal bender. That's all I had heard, and frankly, I wasn't too keen on the idea, and so I said I'd use him in Daredevil. Easier for me to do this than to assign it to another writer, I thought. Cut to a week or so later, I was at a party up at Patty Greer's upstate New York home, and I happened to see a copy of Uri Geller, My Story, in her bookstand. Asking if I could borrow it for background information, I began reading it and getting more and more involved with the reading. It was a fascinating story, and yes, I was hooked, though still a total cynic. It was then that Uri called, asking if he could come up to the offices to speak with me to discuss the story. I said sure, hoping that this would be a chance to find out some things not in the book. He did come up the next day, and I found him to be a very likable person, an avid Marvel fan, and not at all what one would expect a person with special powers and abilities to be like. In other words, the furthest thing from an egomaniac that you could hope to find. During the course of our talk, he asked for a key, which I gave him, then asked me to hold his fingers to see if he was pressing on the key. They were loosely around the heavy metal key, and slowly, as I held his fingers with mine, I watched the key bend. Yeah, I may be a cynic, but I don't ignore facts. The key had bent, I was holding his fingers, so I know he wouldn't bend them with his hand, and it was my key. Whatever powers he had were real. At that point, he asked me to draw a picture and not show it to him. He then began drawing his own picture, and as you can see from our two illustrations reproduced on the page, it's a cat that has like a forward-facing face.
Okay.
The sketches are very similar. Considering the rough drawing style from which Uri was trying to receive his psychic impressions, he was able to come very close to my own illustration, even duplicating the bizarre front view of the face on the side view of the body. I began a cynic and now I'm a believer of whatever abilities Uri has, and if there are any superheroes in this world, we should hope they are all as nice as Uri. Signed, Marv Wolfman.
Okay.
So, which, like, again, the key trick is a thing that I watched The Amazing Randy do on video and show how he did it. So again, and the way that he does the drawing stuff too is like he's like Randy lists a number of different ways to accomplish that, most of which involve basically cheating. So, which I actually watched a video that was presented by Randy that shows on camera Uri Geller cheating one of those drawing things.
Oh, really?
Yes.
He's got receipts.
He literally has a video of him doing it. So Uri was being extra cheeky with his stupid Daredevil thing there. Also, a side thing that was making me feel insane, but in the documentary, when they do this whole Daredevil shtick, it's playing 1960s Batman TV music.
Oh, wow, really?
Yes. In fact, the music throughout the whole documentary is ridiculous because for some reason it plays Dragnet, it plays the theme from Star Trek, it plays the theme from X-Files, James Bond, Twin Peaks, and I think more. But for whatever reason, that's what's in this documentary. It is really strange.
And it's used not as like references, but just as like actual just background music.
Sometimes it's references, like when he starts talking, because there's points where Geller will just be like, "Oh, I was a spy. It was my childhood dream," okay. And then it's playing James Bond music, or it's playing Secret Agent Man, you know. But then it's like there are times where he's just talking about whatever, and it's like you hear fucking Laura's theme from Twin Peaks or whatever. I'm like, what the fuck? It's really weird.
All right.
I'm just guessing that like maybe somehow they just had access to this stuff for free or for cheap or something. I really don't know. So by all accounts, Geller's like most successful period was when he was in England. That's where he got the most notoriety. That's where he had the most television and radio appearances. He would actually end up living there in 1985 for a stint. And he, you know, the Nature magazine or journal rather, that's where he got published. That was a British, like, I guess, very prestigious scientific journal in England.
Okay.
So he's super popular throughout the late 70s and 80s in England. I saw a couple places actually like cheekily refer to it as Geller Mania in Europe.
Jesus.
Which is, of course, a nod to the Beatles.
I have no idea if you would know this in any way, shape, or form. But so this was the scientific journal that published him. Do you know if they ever like retracted or said anything about this?
Yeah, the editors of Nature like basically were like, not all scientific work is good or true. Like, this is not an admission of this being factual. Like, they literally had editors say like, and I think that there was like some internal protest about publishing it, but there's like a whole thing where like, I don't have the actual like full journal, but apparently one of the things at the front of the journal was an editor saying like, publication in this journal is not an endorsement, you know?
Fair. So they got, oh man. All right. That's interesting that like it was even controversial at the time.
No, it's
inside the magazine.
It's so funny to me that is like, and I wonder like if there was like a little bit of coercion going on somewhere, but who knows? Because apparently it got published in this big journal, but people weren't happy about it. Even with the publication of James Randi's The Magic of Uri Geller, where he in 1975, where he basically just like takes down everything that he has seen him do. His reputation is not tarnished. And honestly, like Randy there's some issues with Randy, but like I don't necessarily get the impression that he was like, I'm trying to ruin this man. But he is like really indignant about like Geller's attempt to pass off his very simple trickery as legitimate like supernatural powers. He just really hates that.
It's basically just the plot of Now You See Me.
Yeah. And like, of course, Geller has his own book that gets widely published and is super popular. And so like basically like the late 70s through the 80s, like Geller does these like tours around Europe and around North America and South America and all over the place, doing demonstrations, talks, whatever. And we have a weird thing that happens where he has a trip in 1976 to Mexico. And when he goes to Mexico, he ends up working with Sir Val Duncan, chairman of the Rio Tinto Zinc Corporation, to douse for oil at the behest of the president of Mexico. And
wow, okay.
For what apparently this was a successful venture, like according to the people who worked with him, like mostly this practice was a you know, people tried not to talk about it. It had like non-disclosure agreements and stuff. But Peter Sterling, who was once the chairman of the Australian mining company Xanex, Zanex, went on the record in 1986 in the Financial Times that he was, quote unquote, well pleased with Uri's services. So whatever it is he's fucking doing with these people, they like it. And Uri himself in the documentary will like talk about going up in helicopters and having a map and like psychically feeling out the locations and stuff. It's like this to me is one of the weirder things that I'm like, I don't quite understand what's going on here, but it makes me think that there's some weird, shady stuff where Uri Geller has these, like, he gets put in contact with these people. I don't know what's going on here. I don't, because like,
It sounds like cover up. It sounds like the like a bad cover story for a spy mission.
Yeah,
like,
either that or he's like somehow managed to wriggle his way into this industry and profit off of it. Because
yeah, I mean
he has made a ton of. This is like his primary money making thing. Is
dowsing?
Yes, like.
Wow, okay.
Obviously, he made money as like a quote-unquote infotainer, and he would have a TV show and all this other stuff. But apparently his personal fortune is from this.
Interesting.
Which is interesting, right? Like, that's super weird. It's actually his trip to Mexico that once again marks another especially weird point in Geller's career, where I can only describe that like part of his career, at least according to him and other people in the CIA who have come out and talked about it. He's like a psychic military contractor almost. And I keep in mind that throughout the 70s and 80s, Geller is also making a part of his living going on TV, telling everybody classic new agey bullshit about his powers, like making suggestions that other people could develop their powers. It would be a mishmash of like higher consciousness stuff, energetic tuning, human aura manipulation. Like there's a video of him in Mexico City on TV showing people the different layers of the human aura and stuff like that.
So he just is doing everything, private, commercial, like infotainment, dowsing. Like he's a man of many talents.
And like, again, I'm a skeptic. People know this listening to this show. There is no such measurable thing as a human aura. It just like there isn't. Like, I'm sorry. It's just not a thing, but he's out there talking about this shit and being taken fully seriously, and apparently seriously enough that intelligence agencies and militaries around the world want to work with him. Very weird. And the side of Geller that seems to be revealed in this documentary is this like dead seriousness of his like involvement with these military and intelligence operations going simultaneously with his like new age circuit of like promoting psychic self ability or whatever, which also like branches out. If you like look at some of his stuff, it also kind of basically just branches out into self-help, which is another fucking scam industry, in my opinion. So, he's on Televisia 2 talking about this stuff and dowsing for the president at the same time. And there's this really weird thing that they brush over where like he was very close with the Mexican president's wife at the time, whom it's like implied that he was a psychic bodyguard for her, and you have footage of him just like hanging out with her, getting food with her, and stepping out of the car. I don't know. I want to believe that he was having an affair with the president's wife, but who knows? I don't know. That's completely, but it's like it's so weird. So all of this, by the way, let me put a little point on this, Niall. All of this shit's happening in Mexico with him. And this is also when he claims to have gotten his first open contact by the CIA. So, you know how like he's
keeping busy.
Yeah. He did the SRI experiments and had supposedly had no idea that CIA, was funding that stuff. Although if you read about people who were there at the time and people who've talked about it, people will basically say it was almost like an open secret that the CIA was funding stuff at SRI. So like, you know, maybe we can't say whether or not Geller knew this, but it wouldn't surprise me if he did. But this is when he claims he actually got his first contact by the CIA. And this is in the documentary, but I think he's talked about it elsewhere. And he says that in the documentary, a man named Roger Sawyer, who was an Indiana born and raised former U.S. Army officer who ends up in the Foreign Service in Mexico City, I guess met with Geller during this time in Mexico sometime around 1977. And Sawyer confirms this weird fact about Geller, which is that somehow during his visit, Geller he had only been there for a little while. Geller had somehow obtained Mexican citizenship and a Mexican passport. Geller claims that this was in his service of helping Pemex find, quote, one of the largest oil reserves ever at the behest of the president of Mexico. So apparently this is when the CIA contacted him due to his work with SRI. And Geller says that he spoke over the phone with an agent only going by the name Mike. And after agreeing to work together, Geller was tasked with some assignments. And what he describes is that first and foremost, he was asked to spy on the Russian embassy in Mexico City, which is, I guess, the largest Russian embassy in South America. And Geller claims that he was told about a, quote, diplomatic package that goes out of the embassy every 10 to 12 days filled with, quote, secret stuff, which he describes as being like floppy disks filled with data. And again, this is all according to Geller, but he claims that he was asked to use his mind to erase the data on the floppy disks as it was escorted in a briefcase by a KGB agent. And the story goes that Geller would board flights with these agents and think to himself, erase, 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 to try and wipe the data. When asked how Geller knew covert CIA operations like this would actually work, like they got what they wanted from him, he replies, because they asked for more. So,
okay.
Again, by his account, he is a very successful psychic spy for the CIA and probably Mossad. As a skeptic, I'm saying that shit didn't happen. So what does this story serve? Because it's not real. It's so, but this is what he claims. And furthermore, a lot of these things are backed up by former CIA people, by the way.
Wow. The fact that he's like, they brought me in to erase some discs. This wasn't a skill that he claimed he had. They just asked him and he basically was like, I'm going to try it.
Yeah.
And then they kept bringing him back. Like, that is such a wild story to concoct because it takes him being able to say, yes, it worked out of the equation so totally because it's not up to me. It's the CIA.
Yeah. You're
not going to ask. It's such like a good way to deflect having to answer any questions that would be hard to answer for him.
Yeah.
I don't like it, but it's interesting.
It's fun to read about. It's fun to read about, but like the more I learn about him, the more I'm like, you are a lying son of a bitch. You are.
Sure. Yeah.
But he I mean, like he had told a story about how like after, like I'd kind of mentioned how like he claims to have also been approached by Mossad for operational stuff, and that this ended up on the desk of the CIA at some point as well, like prior to the SRI experiments. So like it's not totally out of the blue that they're asking him to do this weird shit, because like I mean it is if you don't believe his story, but if you believe his story, like Geller had already done similar things for Mossad operationally.
Okay.
But it is also like I don't know. So for a time, Geller would live in New York, In the documentary, he describes this time in his life in some detail. He basically just brags about having an incredibly lavish life due to being a Hollywood movie-style secret agent. He talks about being strapped to the teeth, walking around the streets of New York and going to fancy restaurants and ordering every dessert on the menu, all while doing some sort of ill-defined undercover work for the CIA and maybe Mossad, bullshit like that. Geller also claims a lot of ridiculous shit when working for intelligence agencies, like knocking out radar systems for the Mossad during psychic ops and such. Again, these are things that I don't think actually happened at all.
Yeah.
But as Geller gets more and more into the history of his work for secret agencies and such, the less you can trust anything out of his mouth. Like, he's already untrustworthy because he's trying to pass off magic tricks as psychic abilities, and he's making a killing doing it. But now he also has this ability to make tons of money doing all the other shit I just described. He honestly, to me, began to feel a lot like a psychic Richard Doty in a way. He even tells this like story of being directed to do a Men Who Stares at Goats style thing where he is instructed to psychically stop the heart of a pig, and that there was like this potential that on the success of him killing a pig with his mind, they would send him to like take out other people, like actual humans, because the heart of pigs or whatever is like similar to a human heart or something. So
okay.
Yeah,
sure, why not? I know they use like pig stuff as like the flesh is supposedly like human flesh,
Mythbusters and all that.
Yeah, I have more Forged in Fire, but yeah.
I forgot about that shit.
Yeah. Look, sometimes you just learn. Sometimes you learn things from Discovery Channel.
It's true, and sometimes
or history, whatever.
Sometimes you just need to see a guy swing a big sword. I feel that. I need.
It will cut.
I need to see that in my life. Like, it occurs to me with my particular interests. I see somebody swing a big cool sword every week of my life.
Look, it's really vital. The thing that wasn't vital, however, was the spin-off competition show.
Oh, no.
Where they tried to blend Forged in Fire with like Ninja Warrior, where they're like going through an obstacle course for
trying
knives.
To cut down their enemies.
Just cutting like a bunch of stuff quickly.
Oh, that's badass.
It was hosted by fucking Goldberg.
That's great. I love that, actually. It sounds terrible, but I would probably watch some of that.
It is like... It's total car crash television.
Yeah.
It's like 6 episodes or some shit. Kind of worth your time.
Okay. All right. So we could get into more stories about his supposed involvement with secret ops around the world, but honestly, it's a lot of winks and nods and nudges from Geller. And of course, there are like ex-CIA and military who will like, in a way, confirm his stories. Although like sometimes it's like somebody saying like, yes, I saw Geller with these credentials. But they make no comment about his like psychic abilities, and then you'll get like a former CIA director, not director, like a former CIA, like I don't know, agent or whatever, being like, "Oh yeah, he can fucking explode pigs with his brain." So I don't know. I take all of that with quite the grain of salt. Now I would like to get into some of the legal battles of Uri Geller. So it was in the 80s and 90s that Geller would sue the Amazing Randy multiple times. This was, of course, after Randy was a well-established Geller debunker. And, of course, like I said, he embarrasses him on live television. He writes a book that basically explains away every single magician's trick that he's done to exploit the gullible. So here we have from the July 1991 New Scientist article, Lawsuits May Silence Critics of the Paranormal. Quote, James Randi, the American investigator of paranormal claims, is being sued for $15 million by Uri Geller, famous in the 1970s for his apparent ability to bend spoons supernaturally. Geller objects to comments in an article in the International Herald Tribune on the 9th of April, in which Randi poured scorn on Geller's psychic abilities. The skeptical movement is also concerned that this type of litigation could gag debunkers. There is a danger that the threat of substantial libel suit can have an intimidating effect on critics of the paranormal, says Stephen Donnelly, editor of The Skeptic magazine. This is Geller's third suit against Randi, who won both of the previous two. Randy believes 2 more are threatened, 1 in Japan and 1 in Finland. Randy was also a founder of CSI-COP, the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of the Claims of Paranormal, which is also named in Geller's lawsuits. Randy has resigned from CSI-COP in order, he says, to protect it from the threat of future actions. In an open letter from Uri Geller Associates, based in Berkshire, Geller says, "I will sue Randy in every country where my legal rights enable me to stop him from spreading lies about me. What he said about me is not the truth." Randy is confident that he will win the case. "I have great faith in the American system of jurisprudence to defend against suits of this kind," he says. "I have a right under the Constitution to fairly say what I know to be true, and I will not surrender that right. However, the cost of freedom of speech is high." Randy says that defending himself against the last 2 suits ran to 6 figures in costs. The use of suits to silence critics would be nothing new in the U.S. SLAPP's. Strategic lawsuits against political participation have become a problem for environmentalist groups lobbying against industrial pollution. A study at the University of Denver, funded by the National Science Foundation, showed that such suits do discourage opposition. So, what exactly was Geller so adamant about suing Randy over? Well, first of all, let me get into the Skeptic's Handbook again, because it kind of goes into the overall things that were pissing Geller off. First of all, James Randi, has been able to demonstrate all of the things that Uri Geller has done, using physical manipulation and just like cheats. He bent keys, like I said. He could then like do the guessing things that he did. He could imitate the Shippy Strang stuff where like Geller has probably like somebody planted in the audience to help him or whatever. And there's also this thing where like Geller will talk about like compasses and watches and things. I think this is more of a compass thing, but like the heat in your hand over time on certain compasses would cause it to start to move on its own.
Interesting.
Things like that. I don't know if this is true of contemporary compasses, but like there is something about how like you could get watches or something to like start to move with the heat in your hand as it built up and warmed the thing. And I've seen him do all these things. And of course, Randy was consulted to make sure that tests on Johnny Carson's show were completely foolproof. And every time this kind of thing happened, Geller could not produce any results. It is all about Geller having control of the conditions of the experiment. And again, if he does not succeed, he talks about how there's too many skeptics and too many people negativizing the vibes or whatever the fuck term they would use. Here's a little interesting tidbit from the Skeptic's Handbook here that I liked. So it says here, 2 psychologists, David Marks and Richard Kamen, carefully monitored Geller's trip to visit to New Zealand, which, again, he's on this like tour. Marks was permitted to test Geller in his hotel room. He had placed a previously prepared drawing of a sailboat in a sealed envelope and handed it to Uri. Marks was surprised when Geller was able to duplicate the figure. Later, Marks retrieved the discarded envelope and found that Geller had evidently peeled it open when Marks was in the bathroom and the other observer was distracted by a phone call. He apparently peeked into the envelope to see the drawing. Richard Kamen also tested Uri's ability to divine drawings, and he found that Uri would succeed if he could observe the movements of the top of the pencil. But if the pencil top was concealed, he could not. In testing their students, Marks and Kamen also demonstrated that an astute person could perceive the outlines of a folded drawing through the envelope if allowed to put it up to the forehead, as Geller had done. So, like, he can look through it using light, right?
Yeah. I wondered if if you're going to do this kind of experiment, you cannot let the person touch the envelope.
Right. People, and this is the problem with him. As to the thousands of reports of bent cutlery that radio and TV stations had received, Marks observed that virtually anyone can find a bent fork or spoon in their house if a thorough search is made. Marks and Kamen also performed an interesting test of watches that needed repairs. If a watch or clock is... Oh, this is what I was talking about. If a watch or clock is held in the palm of the hand for a few minutes, the heat from the body is able to warm the watch and it often begins to tick. They examined watches awaiting repair in 7 jewelry stores, and they found that 60 out of the 106 started ticking again when held in a warm hand for a few minutes. The success rate was 57%. However, there is no evidence that Uri can repair watches by the mind alone, not when the mainspring is broken or some other structural mechanism is in need of repair. And there's another story here where, like, Geller, like, there was, you know how, like, scientists are, like, supposedly taking him on and testing him and then going, my God, he has powers. I should have put this in my notes, but there's a story where, like, there's another scientist who has, like, tested children for psychic powers doing various methods, and has also, I think, like, tested Geller. And the guy is, like, pretty credulous because James Randi visits him and replicates everything that Geller is described as doing, and is, like, basically says, like, this scientist is just completely unaware of, like, how conjuration works as a magician. And he was fooled by it. And he just basically replicates the experiment and then says to the scientist, like, hey, I can show you exactly how I did every single one of these things, and you were fooled. So again,
just because you're a scientist doesn't mean that you can't be fooled by things that you don't understand.
Absolutely. And again, I would like to point out that, like, Puthoff, among other people involved at the SRI experiments, is already predisposed as a fucking Scientologist to believe in so many of the things that Uri Geller is selling. That is just a part of Scientology. They believe that shit. So again, these are not impartial observers, and they're all terribly flawed experiments. And, you know, so it's stuff like this with Randi that exposed Geller and irritated a lot of magicians. If you want a rundown of basically every trick Geller has done and how he's done it, you can check out Randy's book, The Magic of Uri Geller, which is just up on the Internet Archive. Randi also wouldn't be the only skeptic who has gone after Geller's tricks. So there's a skeptical writer named Martin Gardner, who I think has come up in our show before, who
name sounds familiar.
He's trained on, like, how magic works, how tricks and what the techniques are. And he even says that Geller's magic is amateurish and mediocre, and that when basically his entire ability to sell his stuff is dependent on the fact that he claims to have psychic powers. And it gives him an out in the presence of skeptics as well, as I've described. And I didn't get into this whole part of Geller's life, but, like, Geller had a reality TV career, which is completely expected, right? So, which I believe was in the 2000s. So he had an Israeli TV show called The Successor, and then he was on the American version of that show called Phenomenon on NBC. I didn't cover too much of this stuff, but, like, I guess that on The Successor in Israel, he was caught using this fake finger trick to rig this psychic thing that he was doing. So he just straight up gets caught on this show. And then on the American version, Chris Angel is one of the co-judges of Geller and another contestant who also claimed to be a psychic. And Chris Angel, I guess, like, conducted a thing with them where, like, they were trying to divine the contents of an envelope, and they completely failed to do so, because I think there was some setup by Chris Angel or the show somewhere to...
He mind freaked
him. Which, like, Chris Angel, for as much as, like... He has, like, a gimmick, right? But his gimmick, as far as I know, isn't to necessarily tell you, like, I'm a real psychic who can cast spells or whatever. I think it's just to be like, whoa, that's fucking crazy and edgy magic, you know, like, that's his thing, right? Like,
his thing is, I can do the impossible, and that involves usually getting impaled by shit.
Right. Or like levitating. Or,
he's in the, like, David Blaine type stage magic where it's like making shit disappear and stuff go through him, and, like,
I had a very brief phase when I was very young where I watched Chris Angel. Because I liked magic, and I was, like, I remember trying desperately as a young, stupid child to figure out how he did some of that shit. And
Yeah.
But I couldn't remember if like he like also tried to claim he was a psychic, but I don't think he did. I think he was literally
I think he might have some like mentalist kind of bullshit in the kind of cold reading tricks way, but I don't remember. I never watched a lot of Chris Angel.
Yeah.
But I do like, still to this day I like Penn and Teller bull. Like what's their they have a show where magicians try to fool them. I think it's called like Fool Us or something, and it's like a game show. That one's fun.
That sounds cool. Yeah, you told me about that. Yeah, I used to watch that stuff as a kid. But like apparently, yeah, Chris Angel even got one over on Uri Geller at one point. Now, Randy would not be Geller's only target for litigation. In the year 2000, Geller would bring a lawsuit to Nintendo for supposedly stealing his identity, quote, by using his name and his signature image, end quote, and turning him into, quote, an evil occult Pokemon character. And this Pokemon would be Kadabra.
Hell yeah.
He would even go so far as to claim that Kadabra was rife with anti-Semitic imagery, with an occult star on his forehead and runic Nazi SS symbols on its belly, which, like, go ahead and Google a picture of Kadabra. I don't think so, man. He literally just has a star on it, like a 5-point star on its head. I think it's just trying to look occult, right? Like Kadabra is like a psychic occult Pokemon. That makes perfect sense. Now, in my opinion, anybody with a brain can see that this is absurd. And while the spoon-bending design of Kadabra can definitely be traced back to Geller, because I think the Japanese name for the Pokemon has like Geller in it. I do think that was definitely inspired by him. I don't think there's anything anti-Semitic about this Pokemon. This assertion, this has been fact-checked by your podcasting Jewish guy. You're allowed to like Kadabra.
Yeah. Cool.
I would not say it's anti-Semitic. But of course, like Nintendo did freak out. Even though I think that the initial lawsuit was dismissed in 2003. But like Geller's, baseless claim and litigious nature resulted in no Kadabra Pokemon cards being printed for 2 decades. So thank you, Uri.
Really?
Yes. 20 years Kadabra was not printed in the game. He's
just on the cards?
I think on the Pokemon cards specifically. Cause like obviously like Kadabra's still in the games throughout this time, but like also it didn't appear in a bunch of media for a very long time.
What if it just like part of the settlement was that he had to be removed from the poker rap? So there was just like a moment of silence whenever it's just like a moment of silence
for Kadabra. If everybody could bow their heads for our fallen Pokemon brother.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks Uri for that. He actually, oh my God. Okay. So in 2020, Geller actually finally relented on the whole Kadabra thing, and he went to Twitter to apologize to Pokemon fans. I have here this Kotaku article, Magician Ends 20-Year Battle with Nintendo Over Pokemon Card by Nicole Carpenter. And we get this little write-up here that made me really angry, because I remember this happening when I was a kid and being like, what the fuck? Leave Kadabra alone. That was like, I loved psychic Pokemon. I still do. And that one I remember being like irritated as a kid hearing about this. So here's what it says in the article. I am truly sorry for what I did 20 years ago, Geller wrote on Twitter. Kids and grown-ups, I am releasing the ban. Thank you, Geller. Thank you, Uri, so much for finally having the benevolence to release the Kadabra. It's now all up to Nintendo to bring my Kadabra Pokemon card back. Also, again, claiming possession here of it. It will probably be one of the rarest cards now. Much energy and love to all. Later, he published a video where he sorted through a large suitcase full of Kadabra memorabilia, including cards in Japanese and English. The Japanese card is called Young Geller, which is very close to Geller's name. He's also got a number of figurines and toys stuffed away in the bag. Geller told gaming website The Gamer that he received tremendous amounts of emails from Pokemon fans asking him to drop the case and allow Nintendo to bring back Kadabra. He added that Nintendo representatives picked up his letter. So, yeah, he has like a like.
So have we found his eBay account where he was trying to sell all that shit
That's
yet?
exactly where I was about to go. Is like he has like a fucking mass collection of Kadabra stuff that became presumably rare after his threat of litigation got it banned from the game for a while. Like
all of his grifts also involve, like, we've gone through so many grifts this guy has had, the fact that there's also one where he's like low key trying to create a speculative market around a Pokemon that kind of looks like him is really fucking funny.
It doesn't look like him though. It just has maybe his name, and it's a psychic spoon bending Pokemon. Like Kadabra has spoons that it bends, but as far as looking like him, it doesn't. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, okay, but I think that there's this thing that I find really funny about this guy in general. Is that like for all of the things that he claims to have done, for all of the things that he has supposedly been involved with and actually been involved with, the fact that if you ask literally anyone if they know who Uri Geller is and they say yes, the only thing they'll be able to say is that he was a spoon bender is really funny to me.
Yeah.
And so like spoon bending Pokemon, I get the in like where that came from. But it's just very funny that this guy keeps trying to add to his own legacy, and everyone's just like, "Oh yeah, that guy that bends spoons, is he still doing things?"
Yeah. Well, I can tell you some of the stuff that he did in the 2000s, but we're kind of approaching his. He still tries to stay relevant, but I would say that like after 2000, he just starts to be less relevant after his. It's decidedly less interesting, but he continues to just like jump on every fantastical thing that is happening. So like, for instance, in 2009, he bought an uninhabited island off the coast of Scotland that's called the Lamb. And there's a bunch of like mystical stuff attached to like stories about the island. Which it's like, it's associated with the Knights Templar. And, you know, for people who believe in this shit, the Knights Templar maybe had like mystical powers. And then it's also like there's nearby islands that like if you look at it and compare it to the Giza pyramids, they have a similar layout supposedly. And then that layout, as you're probably aware, Niall, supposedly the pyramids are also fashioned to be on the same layout as Orion's belt. So these are all supposed to match together, right? Whatever that means for you, you know, that's what people decide is it's like mystical or extraterrestrial or whatever. And then there's also this claim that is, I think, like not necessarily true, made by a guy named Jeff Nisbet. And he says that, quote, anyone standing on the battlefield of Bannockburn, where Robert the Bruce defeated the English army in 1314, on the anniversary of the battle on June 24th, would see the three stars, Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka, rise exactly over the three islands of Craiglith, Lamb, and Fidra. So those are the three islands that supposedly match up with Orion and have some sort of mystical meaning.
Okay.
Geller himself will say that the Lamb was visited 3,000 years ago by Princess Skoda, the sister of the pharaoh Tutankhamun. And I guess that he thinks that there's buried treasure there.
Well, he's trying to get his own fucking what's the gold money island off like the coast of New York or whatever the fuck.
right
there's that reality show about.
Yes,
he's trying to get his own version of that.
Yeah, so he believes that there's some sort of like pharaoh's treasure there.
Oak Island money pit, that's what
that's right. He thinks that that's there, and so he's like, he bought it so that he could excavate it and do some dowsing on the island. And he also I think that I read somewhere too that the island, there's a nearby island there that is the inspiration for the book Treasure Island.
Okay.
So it might be that there's some conflation there about, secret treasure on the island, and I don't know. So he owns a fucking island because he fucking can,
Yeah, because he doused for every government around the world.
Yes. So he actually, I think, let me take a look here because I'm pretty sure he has, here it is. So he, on urigeller.com, this is what he's done with Lamb now. If you click through, on his website, it says, click here to become a citizen of Uri's mystical island for just $1. Proceeds go to charity. And you click through and it says, become a citizen of the most mysterious land in the world. Get Lamb Island citizenship for $1. And so...
Did the Pirate Bay ever try to run their shit from Lamb? Imagine that confluence of events.
The legal... The thing is, though, Uri Geller has way too many friends in the CIA that I would,
you're right.
It might be too tough to... But you can become a member by giving him $1. So... Oh, fuck.
All right, fine.
So, now, there's this thing here, too, that the Amazing Randy brings up that I guess in recent, like in the 2000s and 2010s, he has like kind of fully admitted that for maybe legal reasons, it's honestly similar to what happened to him in Israel, where he's like not allowed to necessarily say in certain cases that he is psychic or has supernatural powers. There is a 2007 interview with Magisch Welt, which is Magic World in Germany, where he says, quote, I'll no longer say that I have supernatural powers. I'm an entertainer. I want to do a good show. My entire character has changed. And so there's a comment on this quote from The Amazing Randy where he says, quote, no, Mr. Geller, just because you've run out of options and have to retreat, your character hasn't changed at all. You're still the man who lied for 35 plus years to the media, to your sponsors, to the public, to researchers, to naive scientists, and to government officials, saying that you were not a magician, that you didn't and couldn't do magic tricks, that you had genuine psychic abilities. And you said all this knowing that these people would choose to believe you and would commit themselves to promoting and endorsing your spurious claims. So, he's still out there. So to this day, he's out there still saying bullshit. Literally the day I was finishing these notes, a couple days ago, an article came out where he claims to believe a UFO mothership is hanging out in our solar system somewhere. And this is based on a photo that was supposedly shown to him by an Israeli lieutenant colonel. And then the photo was later revealed to be edited and inauthentic by Twitter community notes. Geller also, I think, took credit for moving the ship that was stuck in the Suez Canal using mental energy.
I'm glad you came in and helped with that one.
As a bunch of UFO-related stories have been popping up out over these last however many years now, so too did Geller's stories, in which he confirms these stories or he makes predictions about when aliens will land. He basically like advertises himself as somebody who like already knew about all this stuff.
Well, why if he's so powerful, why didn't he stop Will Smith from slapping?
I was just about to say here's the thing. I think that the cosmic forces, the sort of domino effect from the slap, are vital for humanity's future.
Oh, that's like a canon event.
Exactly. It's a negative. It's unfortunately a negative event where everybody's like, "Oh, Will Smith slapped a guy. I liked Will Smith, and now he's a slapper. Fuck. Now I can't watch his movies." That effect unfortunately has to happen for the betterment of humanity. We'll find out.
Look, it's okay. No one watched Gemini Man anyway.
Oh, speak for yourself. That's my movie of the year that year.
If you can tell me who directed Gemini Man off the top of your head,
it was Will Smith's clone, Will Smith 2, who directed that one, I believe. That's the kind of, that's like Tom Cruise level method acting. They actually got his clone for that one.
They did, yeah.
So
they've been working on it for years.
As this fucking bullshit with Grush and all those, and like all those people, like the leaked UFO military footage talks about, like Uri Geller steps in and like involves himself and is like reported on in British media. So like he'll talk about how we need to get our energies on Earth right because the visiting aliens will respond in kind, those kinds of things. He even goes out of his way to claim that there's been a massive government cover-up of UFOs that may have happened and that there's been a decade spanning extraterrestrial contact with our governments. Geller is not only endorsed by the military, the IDF, and the CIA, but he also gets the endorsements by folks like Nick Pope. So Geller claims to have been given... Here's another weird little thing that pops up in the documentary and in a couple of articles. Geller claims to have been given a small golden egg-like rock of unknown origin by his good friend John Lennon back in the day, and that Lennon had been given the object by an extraterrestrial. And he brings up the story in the documentary, and it's like footage of him in his gaudy mansion. He's pulling out of his garage in a Cadillac that is actually just covered in spoons. He has a throne made of spoons, by the way. And he produces this stone egg thing, and he tells the story about how John Lennon was freaked out. They had an extraterrestrial visitation that gave him this thing, and he knew he had to give it to Uri. And Uri says, I've been prompted by fan emails and letters asking me to get the object scientifically tested, see if we can find out if it's truly off planet. And he says this, quote, "And you know what I say? I don't want to test it. I don't want to find out that it's made in Taiwan. I want to believe John. I want to believe his words. I love it." In, I believe, 2015, Geller returned to Israel with his wife, settling down with the oil dowsing wealth. That is literally what he has used to, a big portion of what he's used to basically acquire a small mansion. And I'll say he has like a museum of bullshit. And he says in an article, quote, "In every Israeli's heart, there's a kind of spiritual, burning desire to come back to their homeland. For me, it was massively important." So that's why he returned to Israel. It's so important for them to go back to their homeland that's less than 100 years old. And there he has, like I said, a Uri Geller museum he manages that's filled with gifts from celebrities, memorabilia he's collected, the Daredevil comic pages and stuff. Trinkets, hoarded bullshit. He literally actually is like, "Oh, I'm kind of a hoarder." He says that.
Okay.
And so there he is in Israel, sitting on a pile of trinkets and wealth from oil. So I could do a lot more on Geller. This has been, I think, in my opinion, sufficient coverage. One day I would like to maybe do a full episode on The Amazing Randy instead of just his involvement in this story, because he's not all brilliant skeptic and magician.
I'm sure he's got his skeletons.
There's some not so great stuff about him too, but Geller is a font of nonsense, and you can go online and find an abundance of crap if you would like to. I'm sparing you, at least in my opinion, but there is so much more to Uri Geller. But I think I covered the big beats there. So that's...
Yeah, like the Johnny Carson show. That was a pretty big beat.
Yeah. So that's Uri Geller, Niall. I kind of finished this after watching so much of him. I just, on a personal note, despite all his ability to sell himself, I really dislike this man.
I don't think that is a big surprise.
Yeah. But he is like supposedly the reason that the CIA signed off on the Stargate project. So he's important to that story and our psychic winter here. And that brings me, Niall, to the big question. Are you ready?
Okay. I'm curious what the big question will be to top this all off.
In an alternate timeline, Geller has been ruined by his appearance on Johnny Carson. As a job recruiter, you have been tasked with finding a new job for him. What job do you think you could get Geller, and why? I have an instant answer. I'm curious if it's the same as yours.
Feel free. Go ahead.
Car salesman.
Oh, okay.
This man is
like used car or like new car?
Like
is he going to be
used car salesman? He's going to take over a lot, and he is going to sell shitty cars. And he's going to be really fucking good at it.
Okay. Yeah. What do you remember? What year did the Johnny Carson thing happen?
73, actually, the same year that like he was in the swing of the SRI stuff.
Okay. I was just trying to place it in terms of what would be like a good topical thing of the time period.
Sure,
that's not my best.
I guess like drug dealer could be a good one for the 70s.
No, I was trying to think of like, I think that he could be on like the cutting edge of what we now would call viral marketing.
Oh, sure.
I feel like he would,
that is kind of what he does now. If you think about it, right?
Exactly.
Like he will take any big story about UFOs or whatever, because that's the hot button thing in these last couple of years, and just insert himself and advertise himself through it. So
I honestly like it's better that he's left to the devices of being a quote entertainer than it would be if he were in like the advertising world, because I do think he would have sped the downfall of civilization if he'd gotten a hold of like that kind of in that cultural moment.
Yeah, too much power over that kind of, definitely. It would be like catastrophic.
Because like that was like, I feel like we were getting into the age of like subliminal advertising and all the stuff where like advertising started to get insidious around that time period in like the beginning of the 80s and everything. So like, man, Uri Geller using all of his juices to fucking sell you the worst thing possible. Maybe Tab would have like still been around if he had.
Yeah, he ends up working in the advertising division for fucking Tab. That would be sick.
Yeah,
I wish I could still drink.
This is probably
Tab.
Assigning far too much competence to the man, but there is like a skill of getting talked about that he has.
He has a skill to be a charismatic schmoozer who can weave a story. 100%.
Yeah,
it's like. I'm kidding here, like about like, oh, he gets fucked over after Johnny Carson or whatever, and saying, but like the thing is, when you hear him talk and you know all this stuff about him, it actually would make perfect sense that he would work for the CIA in some capacity.
Yeah,
whether or not he's doing psychic, reconnaissance or sabotage of enemy, whatever, like whether or not that's true, I do believe he had like connections to these things because he's such a good story spinner. Like he can decide a narrative and spin it, and people will believe it. So and I think that's an asset that the CIA loves to have. So
agreed.
That just makes sense to me. But, maybe it's all a bunch of bullshit and lies and they just made up a story. But again, this would require military and CIA to lie about
tell the truth.
Oh, well, sure. But they would, if this is all made up, that would imply that the military and the CIA and a bunch of people in high, powerful intelligence positions just lied about it. So I don't know. I don't know. So yeah, that's Uri Geller.
Fantastic.
Thank you for going on this ride with me. It's another one of those things where part 3 is done. I'm honestly so glad to be done. I don't want to read about this dude anymore.
Yeah, that's the blessing and the curse of doing longer form episodes where you get a lot of good stuff in and you learn a lot and there's a lot of interesting things, but you're so tired of it.
Well, it's like I would get like 10 pages into a thing of notes and then discover there's an entire side quest where he's working with a parapsychologist who believes that he's a computer from off planet that's being run by extraterrestrials. Like, and I'm like, oh, fuck, God, I have to talk about this somehow. And you just keep running into that. So, that's Uri Geller. Are you ready for some business?
Yeah, let's go ahead and wrap this up. So if you want to follow us on social media, we're on Twitter at IGW Podcast.
You can follow us on Facebook.com/ItGetsWeirdPodcast.
And we're on all your favorite podcatchers from Google Play to Apple Podcasts to Spotify. If you listen to podcasts somewhere, look up It Gets Weird, and we're probably there.
Twitch.tv/ItGetsWeird. I've had a little bit of a holiday break, but we're going to be getting back to it with some Pokemon Emerald here real soon to kick in the new year, 2024. So we've been streaming that. So go ahead and give us a follow there. And email us at itgetsweirdpodcast@gmail.com. Oh God, I don't have what's a good thing for people to email us about, Niall? Are you psychic? Go ahead and let us know.
Yeah.
And how do you do it?
If you're psychic, you should send us an email about it before this episode posts. Yeah. But
and I would also like to say disclaimer: if you email us about being psychic, but also are trying to promote something, just don't bother because I don't want to do that. Which we do get plenty of those. Patreon.com/itgetsweird. Go ahead and check out patreon.com/itgetsweird. We have a $2 tier and a $5 tier. At the $2 tier, you get access to It Gets Weird TV, where right now we are discussing The X-Files Season 2. And as a donor, you get to decide what show we watch next. So we've seen we've been through X-Files Season 1, now we're going through Season 2, and that's purely on the votes of the patrons. So if you like deciding what TV we get to watch, and it's always something weird, then that's the tier for you. But we also have a $5 tier where you get access to It Gets Weird TV plus another show in the off weeks of It Gets Weird TV. So you're getting bonus content every single week. Whether you donate to the $2 tier or the $5 tier, you get access to the main show 2 days early on Friday instead of Sunday, and you get access to the Discord where we're hanging out. You can talk with us directly. You can, make suggestions. We've had some good suggestions recently on topics we should look into, things like that. But you can also just talk bullshit about like Bigfoot or whatever, or send us pictures of your cats. We get a lot of pictures of cats. We also have a $1 tier where you don't get anything out of it. You're just saying, hey, I like your show. Thanks for doing what you do. Here's $1. If you can't donate, please tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell your congressman all about It Gets Weird podcast.
All right. Thank you all for listening. This has been It Gets Weird, and I've been Niall.
And I'm Kyle, signing out.
Peace.